All right, this is the book Dibs, In Search of Self by Virginia M. Axline. She's the author of Play Therapy. This book is from 1964, and it's a very important one within play therapy. So from the inside jacket of the book, it says, like Geordie/Lisa and David, a perceptive study of disturbed adolescence, Dibs in Search of Self is the portrait of a little boy achieving under therapy a successful struggle for identity. To anyone who has, or ever expects to have, contact with small children, Dibs will be a rewarding and deeply moving experience. Virginia M. Axline is the author of Play Therapy, a work which has helped to make her name synonymous with the technique of play therapy for children. In Dibs, she makes the reader a partner in an extraordinarily affecting, because true, situation. The emergence of intelligence and emotion in a 5-year-old boy so withdrawn that his own parents have judged him mentally defective. Dibs, as it turned out, was a brilliant child, and in this transcript of his treatment, much of it taken from actual tapes, there emerges the personality of a little boy whom the reader will leave with a sense of enormous affection and admiration. In his spirit and his courage, Dibs is as wonderful a child as was the young Helen Keller, and his final mastery of emotional communication parallels her physical triumph. Introduction. This is the story of the emergence of a strong, healthy personality in a previously deeply disturbed child. When the story starts, Dibs had been in school for almost 2 years. At first he would not talk at all. Sometimes he sat mute and unmoving all morning, or crawled about the schoolroom floor, oblivious to the other children or to his teacher. At times he had violent temper tantrums. Teachers, the school psychologist, and the school pediatrician were painfully puzzled by him. Was he mentally retarded? Did he suffer from deep-seated mental illness? Had his brain been damaged at birth? No one knew. The book gives an account of what the author well calls the search for self. On the part of this, at first, pathetically ill little human being. In the end, he emerges as a result of Dr. Axline's subtle and superlatively skillful clinical help, as a brilliant and able person, a true leader. The author is already famous throughout the psychological world for her contributions to the theory and practice of play therapy with children. Her book, Play Therapy, The Inner Dynamics of Childhood, has deservedly won wide acclaim and acceptance. Dibs is an interesting and exciting book for the general reader. It can be read with pleasure and especial profit by all parents who are interested in the marvels of the mental development of their children. It can also be read advantageously by professional students of childhood and of the nature of normal and abnormal mental life. The child described in this book is indeed at first most unusual, but students of psychology and psychiatry have long recognized that many new insights into normal and typical mental processes and into healthy mental development can be gained from the study of the different and exaggerated forms of behavior that appear in atypical individuals. It may also be noted that historically modern psychology owes much to the detailed analysis of single cases. In this connection, the early work of Freud and of Morton Prince may be mentioned. There can be no doubt that one of the great problems of our crowded and technological age is the proper understanding of techniques by means of which lasting changes in personality and behavior can be brought about. Dibs, as a study in mental organization and behavior change, is important in this context. No one who reads this book with understanding can ever again think that human psychological growth, success in a schoolroom, or the acquisition of a complex skill can be achieved merely by overt repetition or by the reinforcement of simple patterns of response. Another new idea emphasized in this book is that the truly deep and effective healing of a disturbed child may help in a very real way the mental hygiene of the child's parents. This is a novel reversal of the old truism that the successful clinical treatment of a child's parents is often the best form of therapy for a disturbed child. But above all, Dibs is good reading. For me, it is as exciting as a first-class detective story. Leonard Carmichael, Washington, D.C. Okay, I'm not going to read the prologue because it looks like it's restating what I just read twice. So we're going to skip over to chapter 1. It was lunchtime, going home time, and the children were milling around in their usual noisy, dawdling way, getting into their coats and hats. But not Dibs. He had backed into a corner of the room and crouched there, head down, arms folded tightly across his chest, ignoring the fact that it was time to go home. The teachers waited. He always behaved this way when it was time to go home. Miss Jane and Hedda gave a helping hand to the other children when it was needed. They watched Dibs surreptitiously. The other children left the school when their mothers called for them. When the teachers were alone with Dibs, they exchanged glances and looked at Dibs huddled against the wall. "Your turn," Miss Jane said, and walked quietly out of the room. "Come on, Dibs, it's time to go home now. It's time for lunch." Hedda spoke patiently. Dibs did not move. His resistance was tense and unwavering. "I'll help you with your coat," Hedda said, approaching him slowly. Taking his coat to him, he did not look up. He pressed back against the wall, his head buried in his arms. "Please, Dibs, your mother will be here soon." She always came late, probably hoping the battle of hat and coat would be over by the time she arrived, and that Dibs would go with her quietly. Hedda was close to Dibs now. She reached down and patted his shoulder. "Come, Dibs," she said gently. "You know it's time to go." Like a small fury, Dibs was at her, his small fists striking out at her, scratching, trying to bite, screaming. "No go home, no go home, no go home." It was the same cry every day. "I know," Hedda said, "but you have to go home for lunch. You want to be big and strong, don't you?" Suddenly, Dibs went limp. He stopped fighting Hedda. He let her push his arms into his coat sleeves and button his coat. "You'll come back tomorrow," Hedda said. When his mother called for him, Dibs went with her. His expression blank, his face tear-stained. Sometimes the battle lasted longer and was not over when his mother arrived. When that happened, his mother would send the chauffeur in to get Dibs. The man was very tall and strong. He would walk in, scoop Dibs up in his arms, and carry him out to the car without a word to anyone. Sometimes Dibs screamed all the way out to the car and beat his fists against the driver. Other times he would suddenly become silent, limp, and defeated. The man never spoke to Dibs. It seemed not to matter to him whether Dibs fought and screamed or was suddenly passive and quiet. Dibs had been in this private school for almost 2 years. The teachers had tried their best to establish a relationship with him. to get a response from him, but it had been touch and go. Dibs seemed determined to keep all people at bay. At least that's what Hedda thought. He had made some progress in the school. When he started school, he did not talk and never ventured off his chair. He sat there mute and unmoving all morning. After many weeks, he began to leave his chair and to crawl around the room, seeming to look at some of the things around him. When anyone approached him, he would huddle up in a ball on the floor and not move. He never looked directly into anyone's eyes. He never answered when anyone spoke to him. Dibs' attendance record was perfect. Every day his mother brought him to school in the car. Either she led him in, grim and silent, or the chauffeur carried him in and put him down just inside the door. He never screamed or cried on his way into the school. Left just inside the door, Dibs would stand there, whimpering, waiting until someone came to him and led him into his classroom. When he wore a coat, he made no move to take it off. One of the teachers would greet him, take off his coat, and then he was on his own. The other children would soon be busily occupied with some group activity or an individual task. Dibs spent his time crawling around the edge of the room, hiding under tables, or in back of the piano, looking at books by the hour. There was something about Dibs' behavior that defied the teachers to categorize him glibly and routinely and send him on his way. His behavior was so uneven. At one time, he seemed to be extremely retarded mentally. Another time, he would quickly and quietly do something that indicated he might even have superior intelligence. If he thought anyone was watching him, he quickly withdrew into his shell. Most of the time, he crawled around the edge of the room, lurking under tables, rocking back and forth, chewing on the side of his hand, sucking his thumb, lying prone and rigid on the floor when any of the teachers or children tried to involve him in some activity. He was a lone child in what must have seemed to him to be a cold, unfriendly world. He had temper tantrums sometimes when it was time to go home, or when someone tried to force him to do something he did not want to do. The teachers had long ago decided that they would always invite him to join the group, but never try to force him to do anything unless it was absolutely necessary. They offered him books, toys, puzzles, all kinds of materials that might interest him. He would never take anything directly from anyone. If the object was placed on a table or on the floor near him, later he would pick it up and examine it carefully. He never failed to accept a book. He pored over the printed pages as though he could read, as Hedda so often said. Sometimes a teacher would sit near him and read a story or talk about something while Dibs lay face down on the floor, never moving away, but never looking up or showing any overt interest. Miss Jane had often spent time with Dibs in this way. She talked about many things as she held the materials in her hand, demonstrating what she was explaining. Once her subject was magnets and the principle of magnetic attraction. Another time, it was an interesting rock she held. She talked about anything she hoped might spark an interest. She said she often felt like a fool, as though she were sitting there talking to herself. But something about his prone position gave her the impression that he was listening. Besides, she often asked, what did she have to lose? The teachers were completely baffled by Dibs. The school psychologist had observed him and tried several times to test him, but Dibs was not ready to be tested. The school pediatrician had looked in on him several times and later threw up his hands in despair. Dibs was wary of the white-coated physician and would not let him come near. He would back up against the wall and put his hands up, ready to scratch, ready to fight if anyone came too close. "He's a strange one," the pediatrician said. "Who knows, mentally retarded, psychotic, brain damaged? Who can get close enough to find out what makes him tick?" This was not a school for mentally retarded or emotionally disturbed children. It was a very exclusive private school for children aged 3 to 7 in a beautiful old mansion on the Upper East Side. It had a tradition that appealed to parents of very bright, sociable children. Dibs' mother had prevailed upon the headmistress to accept him. She had used influence through the board of trustees to have him admitted. Dibs' great-aunt contributed generously to the support of the school. Because of these pressures, he had been admitted to the nursery school group. The teachers had suggested several times that Dibs needed professional help. His mother's response had been repetitive: "Give him more time." Almost 2 years had gone by, and even though he had made some progress, the teachers felt that it was not enough. They thought it was unfair to Dibs to let the situation drag on and on. They could only hope that he might come out of his shell. When they discussed Dibs, and not a day went by that they did not, they always ended up just as baffled and challenged by the child. After all, he was only 5 years old. Could he really be aware of everything around him and everything locked inside? He seemed to read the books he pored over. This, they told themselves, was ridiculous. How could a child read if he could not express himself verbally? Could such a complex child be mentally retarded? His behavior did not seem to be that of a mentally retarded child. Was he living in a world of his own creation? Was he autistic? Was he out of contact with reality? More often, it seemed that his world was a bruising reality, a torment of unhappiness. Dibs' father was a well-known scientist, brilliant, everyone said, but no one at the school had ever met him. Dibs had a younger sister. Her mother claimed that Dorothy was very bright and a perfect child. She did not attend this school. Hedda had met Dorothy once with her mother in Central Park. Dibs was not with them. Hedda told the other teachers that she thought perfect Dorothy was a spoiled brat. Hedda was sympathetically interested in Dibs and admitted she was prejudiced in her evaluation of Dorothy. She had faith in Dibs and believed that someday, somehow, Dibs would come out of his prison of fear and anger. The staff had finally decided that something must be done about Dibs. Some of the other parents were complaining about his presence in the school, especially after he had scratched or bitten some other child. It was at this point that I was invited to attend a case conference devoted to Dibs' problems. I am a clinical psychologist, and I have specialized in working with children and parents. I first heard about Dibs at this conference, and what I have written here was related by the teachers, the school psychologist, and the pediatrician. They asked me if I would see Dibs and his mother and then give the staff my opinion before they decided to dismiss him from school and write him off as one of their failures. The meeting was held in the school. I listened with interest to all the remarks. I was impressed by the impact of Dibs' personality on these people. They felt frustrated and continually challenged by his uneven behavior. He was consistent only in his antagonistic, hostile rejection of all who would come too close to him. His obvious unhappiness troubled these sensitive people, who felt its desolate chill. I had a conference with his mother last week, Miss Jane said to me. I told her that in all probability we might have to drop him from school because we feel we have done all we can to help him, and our best is not enough. She was very upset, but she is such a difficult person to figure out. She agreed to let us call in a consultant and try one more time to evaluate him. I told her about you. She agreed to have a talk with you about Dibs and to let you observe him here. Then she said if we couldn't keep him here, she would like us to give her the name of a private boarding school for mentally retarded children. She said that she and her husband have accepted the fact that he is probably mentally retarded or brain damaged. This remark brought forth an explosion from Hedda. She'd rather believe he is mentally retarded than admit that maybe he is emotionally disturbed, and maybe she is responsible for it, she exclaimed. We don't seem to be able to be very objective about him, Miss Jane said. I think that's why we have kept him as long as we have, and made so much of the little progress he has made. We couldn't bear to turn him away and not have some hand in defending him. We've never been able to discuss Dibs without getting involved in emotional reactions of our own about him and the attitudes of his parents, and we're not even sure that our attitudes about his parents are justified. I'm convinced he's on the verge of coming through, Hedda said. I don't think he can bear to keep his defenses up much longer. There was obviously something about this child that captivated their interests and feelings. I could feel their compassion for this child. I could feel the impact of his personality. I could sense the overwhelming awareness of our limitations to understand in clear, concise, immutable terms the complexities of a personality. I could appreciate the respect for this child that permeated the conference. It was decided that I would see Dibs for a series of play therapy sessions. If his parents agreed to the idea, we had no way of knowing what this might add to Dibs' story. There is the end of chapter 1, and I'll leave it there. Seems like a very good, very good book so far. Looking forward to chapter 2.